This is Gemara Baba Basra Daf Kuf Chaf, and today's shiur should be an incredible schos Rafua Shlema for Tinok ben Miriam Ahuva b'siyata d'Shmaya. Torah Noishana Rabba Talmud Torah Kenegei Kulam should bring Tinok ben Miriam Ahuva an incredible and complete Rafua Shlema b'Karev. We're holding on Kuf Chaf Amid Aleph. We are 3 lines into the wide lines. Lahalan minaan hakas. We just finished explaining that the Bnei Slavchad, even though they waited till 40 to get married, and we asked, but how could that be? Why does that make them sitkani? Then they can't have any children. We proved from Amram and Yecheved Bas Levi that even though she was 130, she was called Bas Levi. Why? Because she returned her Yofi and she eventually bore Moshe Rabbeinu. Similarly, the Gemara suggests that the Bnei Slavchad were able to have children even at that advanced age. Continues the Gemara, Lahalan Menan Akasov Derech Gedulasan, V'kach Derech Achmasan. Says the Gemara, originally, when the Torah speaks about the marriage of the Bnei Slavchad, we list them derech gedulasan. We list them by age. And now, v'kan derech achmasan. And now we list them by chachma, their wisdom. Masayle the Ravami. So says the Gemara, from the fact that the Torah changes the order of the Bnei Slavchad, is a raya to Ravami, the Amar Ravami b'yeshiva, holach acher chachma b'mesiva, holach acher zikna. When we discuss conference, yeshiva, when we discuss sitting, a bezdin, etc., Torah meetings, we go by wisdom. But b'mesiba, when we discuss a gathering of people, then holach acher zikna, then we go by age. Amar Rav Ashi, proving this point, v'hu demafleg b'chachma. Says Rav Ashi, that when do we say that by Chachma, by Torah, we go by who's greater in Chachma? When do we say that when it comes by Yeshiva, that's only the maflig b'Chachma, is only when there's not someone who is an exceptional Chacham, the Gadol Adar, then he precedes all. And similarly, we only say that we go by age over chachma is only when there's not someone who's a zakein muflik, someone who's very old. So someone who's very old will always trump, and someone who is the Gadol Adar will always trump. Even in the reverse settings, b'mesiba and b'chachma and b'yeshiva, they will always take precedence. Says the Gemara, says Rabbi Shmuel, it's not true what we just said. All the Bnei Slavchad were indeed equal entirely in Chachma. The Mefarshim say in Tzidkos and everything else. Shenemar v'tiyena havaya achas lekulam. The pasuk says v'tiyena, which teaches us they all had one havaya. They were all one and the same. We're about 10 lines down. The first one line is v'tiyena. We continue discussion about the Bnei Slavchad. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Bnei Slavchad hotru li'naseh l'chol hashvatim. The Bnei Slavchad were allowed to marry into any of the Shvatim. Shenemar l'tei v'einayim tiena l'nashim. The pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu repeated b'shem Hashem that those who are favorable should become their wives. Elamani mekayim. So what do we do with the pasuk that says akum mishpachas mata avim tiena l'nashim? What do we do with the pasuk that says that to their shevet they should be their wives? Eitzah Taiva. The pasuk is teaching us in Eitzah Taiva. You see an akasav that what? Shala yinasu ela lahagan lehem. They should marry one who is fitting for them. Yes, indeed, they're allowed to marry anyone. But the pasuk is teaching us that if they marry to their own mishpacha, their own shevet, that is more befitting for each of them. Vaisiv Rabba asks Rabba, Emar Aleim, says Rabba, and the pasuk says with regard to eating food when you're tummy, Emar Aleim, say to them, Loisa na'im din al Har Sinai. That refers to those by Har Sinai, the latter generations. Im Nemar Avos, Lamar Nemar Banim, Im Nemar Banim, Lamar Nemar Avos. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. If we spoke about those who are on Har Sinai, what does that say generations? If it says generations, what does it say those who are on Har Sinai? Neshesh be'avos mashein be'banim. Yesh be'banim mashein be'avos. Says the Gemara, you know why? because there are that which applies to the parents and not the children, that applies to the children, not to the parents. What does apply to the fathers? The pasuk says, and any daughter who inherits a nachla of the Bnei Yisrael should become a wife from those within their shevet. Says the Gemara, that was a specific mitzvah for the time that you have to marry within your shevet. The harbe mitzvahs nistavu banim, and there are many mitzvahs that came to the children of nistavu avos that were not by the parents. Because there were that was by the fathers, not the children. Therefore, the Torah had a right that to teach that what? That the Isser of eating something when you're Tameh applies to everything. So says the Gemara, but what do we see from this Brisa? Kotani miyos. 5 lines from the bottom. What do we see from this Brisa? That it was specifically to the Avos, this din of Chobas Yereshes Nachla. So says the Gemara, it's clear that the Bnei Slavchad were not allowed to marry anyone. And rather, they were, yes, supposed to only marry within their shevet. Answers the Gemara, Rabbi was asked to Shmuel, who Maisav Lavu Mafarikla, and Rabbi himself answered, Lebar B'Bnei Slavchad. This is referring to everyone aside for the Bnei Slavchad. They had a special dispensation that they're allowed to marry anyone they want. Amar Mar. 4 lines from the bottom, the Gemara continues. Says the Gemara, when it comes to Avos, it says they have to marry within the shevet. Ba'avais in Bibanim loy. This is a din only ba'avais and not Bibanim. My mashma. How do I know that such is true? How do we know that it only applies to that first dar that went into Eretz Yisrael that they had a din to marry and not to everyone else? Amar Rav Amar Kral, says Rav, the pasuk says, Zeh hadavar. This is that which Siva Hashem commanded davar zeh. This entity, lo yinoig ella bidar zeh, will only be for this generation and not forever. Amalei Rabba Zuti Rav Ashi. Rabba Zuti asked Rav Ashi, 1 second, 2 lines to the bottom, Elamiata, zeh davar deshchutei chotz. Hachanamid lo yinoig ella bidar zeh. That nusich, that lashon of zeh davar, is also found by shchutei chotz. Are you going to tell me that only applies in that generation? Only for them? Answers Gemara, Shani Yasef Dechsev, L'Dairaisam. By Shchutei Chotz, which of course is the din that you're not allowed to eat karbanos outside the Beis Hamikdash, says the Gemara. The pasuk also says L'Dairaisam, which teaches us that it's not only for that generation, but rather for future generations as well. And therefore, even though it says Zahadavar, it applies afterwards. Continues the Gemara, what about Zahadavar that says Be'Rashi Matais, which is the din, as the top Rashbam speaks out of Kidar Neder, the din of Nadarim? Are you going to tell me that din of a farce Nadarim only applies to that generation? Amar Le, Rav Ashi responds, Ahu Yalif Zeh Mehasam. Zev, we learn out from Shchutei Chotz. It applies always, because by Shchutei Chotz, it says L'Daireisam. So we learn out even Afaras Nadarim. Asks the Gemara, Hainami Le'lev Zeh Mehasam. So wait, so why don't we learn our din as well? Why don't we learn our din about the Bnei Slavchad? Hainami, we should learn out from L'Daireisam that should apply always. Answers the Gemara, Haimai, what are you talking about? By us, there was no reason for the pasuk at all. So lishta kramine v'anayadana l'dayraisu. And I would know on its own that it's l'dayrais. So the fact that the Torah wrote us and it said zeh davar, that shows us that this is dafka only for that generation. Says the Gemara, my gzeir shava. What is the Gzeir Shava Tanya? Nemar kan zadavar nemalan zadavar malalan arnubana v'chol Yisrael. Afkan. So to over here arnubana v'chol Yisrael. Umakan Roshei Matas avlalan Roshei Matais. And that's how we learn that applies not only to arnubana but also the Roshei Matais. Continues the Gemara Amar Mar. Let's understand what's going on. Ma lahalan arnubana v'chol Yisrael. Afkan arnubana v'chol Yisrael. Lamayach. So what is this halacha that applies to Arno Banav and the Chol Yisrael? Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov Leimer smack in the middle of the Amid Shafarta Nidarim B'Shloisha Hadyotais. That Afaras Nidarim we just had, of course, during Elul, that it can be done B'Shloisha Hadyotais with any three people. Asks the Gemara, Vaha Rashi Matais Ksivbe. It says Rashi Matais. So has the Gemara, how can you tell me that it's only how can you tell me, that it's only b'shloisha? How can you tell me it's even b'shloisha hadyotis? The pasuk is Rashi Matais. Kidamar Rav Chisda Amar Rav Yechlan b'yachid momcha. The fact that the pasuk is Rashi Matais teaches that a yachid momcha, a singular expert, could do it in place of shloisha hadyotis. Hachanami, so to over here, when it comes to the Rashi Shvatim, b'yachin mumcha, we could say it's referring to yachin mumcha. Also could be mefer the nidarim or with shloisha hadyotis. Oma can Rashi Matais avlan Rashi Matais. Just like over here by a forest nidarim, it says Rashi Matais. So too by shchutei chutz says Rashi Matais. Lamayachasa amrav sheishas leimer sheishela behektish. What this means is that there's a din of she'ila behektish, that one could ask about hektish. You could undo hektish. Hektish is a din of a neder, and it can be undone like all nidarim, like all vows. Says the Gemara, but 1 second. Beishama damri in she'ila behektish. Beishama argues. Titanan beishami amir hektish toyis hektish. Even a mistake is hektish. Vasila amir eino hektish. So according to Beishamai, of delay, what does Beishamai do? We don't have any reason for the Gzera Shava. Explains the Gemara. That's Dafka. If someone shechs outside of the Beis HaMikdash, the din only the sheikh, not the one that does malika. That's when you shecht a bird, the kind with the thumbnail. Ve'ein Baal Matir, a Chacham can annul a vow, but a husband cannot annul the vow. He cannot undo it from Meikari, he can just revoke it going forwards. Baal Mefer, a husband could revoke, but Ve'ein Chacham, Mefer, a Chacham cannot be Mefer. It's a different process by a Chacham and the Baal. We'll stop over here. We'll continue according to Shittas Beisham in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.